Heretic is a horror thriller about two religious girls having their faith tested by an ominous host. It's pretty intellectually stimulating, though its topic might be tiresome to some viewers. Let's talk about it. In this movie, we follow Sister Barnes and Sister Paxton, who are two Mormon missionaries going around spreading the good word, when one day they knock on the door of one Mr. Reed, played by Hugh Grant. He invites them into his home for a friendly discussion, but what starts out as a seemingly innocent conversation spirals into a dark and twisted test of their faith. So this movie is about the age-old debate of religion. Mr. Reed is the skeptic trying to show people of faith the flaws in their beliefs. But unlike your ordinary Twitter skeptic, he is a total scoundrel and has these meticulously crafted ways of trying to get people to abandon their faith. The nature of the conversations in this movie is very much a game, not just a theological game, but also a social game. Mr. Reed is pushing the buttons of these two Mormon missionaries and making them feel very uneasy. The girls are each trying to navigate these very uncomfortable and intrusive conversations in a way that doesn't outright disrespect their host. This is intensified by the fact that these two girls are low-key being held captive. Mr. Reed has these phony excuses for why they can't just leave out the front door. And the girls are very scared by that, but they play his game because they don't want to potentially endanger themselves by upsetting him. Hats off to each of the actresses here. They both do a great job of looking deeply uncomfortable when they're interacting with Mr. Reed. But they still look like they're trying to do their best to come off as unafraid and innocent so that they can play Reed's social game and not get bullied. So it's pretty messed up what he's doing to them, but it's sometimes weirdly fun because of Hugh Grant's cheery performance. He's basically playing this villain like a dorky dad. He's usually very playful and positive in his demeanor, which is really just all part of his facade. There is so much about his presentation that is semi-realistic to give off the idea that he's just a normal guy, but he doesn't get there 100%. But it's enough to fool the average person, hence why he was able to lure these two girls into his house without them questioning the idiosyncrasies of him or his home. He comes off as playful and innocent, but he's smart and meticulous enough that it becomes very clear that this is all just an act to get people to lower their guards. He's a guy who has essentially made it his life's work to challenge the ideologies of the most faithful people out there for whatever haughty gratifications he gets from that. And he is not sane. Case in point, he remodeled his house into a sadistic trap for young ladies to walk into, just so he can invalidate the things that they consider sacred. I think in the same vein of cinephiles that tend to worship characters like Patrick Bateman and Tyler Durden, Mr. Reed is a character that a lot of people will like because of his very animated personality, coupled of course with his beliefs. It's so interesting how cool and well-crafted this character is, but make no mistake, he is a villain. I say this because I can already see the Thanos did nothing wrong-esque posts people will make about him on Reddit. Anyway, he's challenging these two girls by suggesting that their religion is bogus. It's very much a theological game, and that's what makes up the bulk of the movie's entertainment value. He'll try and walk them into making statements that are clearly contradictory so that he can tear them to shreds in his attempts to try and convert them from their faith. He goes to great lengths to create demonstrations that dismantle their beliefs, but the girls don't always concede to his arguments. Sister Barnes doesn't just humor him throughout the movie, she sometimes barks back at him, which is what makes this movie a little bit more palatable for Mormons and religious people in general. I say a little bit because sometimes Mr. Reed's arguments are pretty ruthless, so I can't help but think that these conversations taking up the bulk of the movie's dialogue will turn off some religious viewers. It tries to be unbiased and friendly to religious viewers by leaving some of Sister Barnes' rebuttals uncontested, and good points are made that defend things like faith and prayer. But I think a lot of Mr. Reed's strongest points that make the movie interesting will be pretty insulting to a lot of people of faith. I'm sure some of you might be thinking, well, that's the point of the movie, to try and get people to open their eyes. As a content creator, I feel obligated to clarify all of that because I'm not in the business of trying to convince people to see movies that will make them uncomfortable. All that said, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts about the movie's religious narrative down in the comments, especially from those of you who are religious and have seen the movie. So it's a very dialogue-driven movie. It eventually evolves into a horror movie, but the bulk of the movie is just carried by these thought-provoking conversations. Its horror elements are very light, so for viewers looking for something very gruesome or scary, this movie isn't really much of either of those two things. Honestly, the movie is actually sometimes pretty silly. Mr. Reed's playful tone can sometimes put a smirk on your face. But sometimes this movie will, like a light switch, just jump from these dark and brainy theological discussions to something kind of silly and lighthearted, and it was actually really enjoyable every time. The movie feels really smart and generally well crafted. There are so many objects in the house that make big statements about Mr. Reed, some of which are foreshadows for things. It's a movie where you should not leave any stone unturned, because there is value from analyzing everything that Mr. Reed owns and every little thing that he does. And there are plenty of double entendres throughout it. The slogan is even question everything because of its implications around questioning religion, but also because it's a thriller. We're constantly guessing and questioning things throughout the movie, like, is it actually supernatural horror or is it not? And what's Mr. Reed's game plan? The ending is a mixed bag. There are things that are wonderful about it, but some of the ways that we get there are kind of cheap. When you recognize all of the details put into place leading up to the end, they kind of pulled a deus ex machina, and that was pretty dissatisfying, but mostly everything else was well earned. So I think this movie will probably do best with people who don't have a lot of experience with face-to-face religious debate. I say this as an agnostic man who was raised in a Methodist Christian household as a preacher's kid. Having been a young and obnoxious religious convert, I have in the past been pretty loud about my disbelief. So I've personally had many religious debates with people of faith in my life, though not in a long time because I'm 30 and I don't care anymore and just will welcome anyone good-hearted into my life. But the point I'm making is that when you've had enough of those debates and conversations, you start to just go in circles and have the same arguments over and over again, just with different people. So if you're like me and you've gone through the motions enough times, this movie might not be as cerebral as you want it to be. I am not by any means trying to be a big mouth and call any of their discussions elementary or dull-witted. I'm just saying that I've had these conversations before. So the movie just didn't really provide any new insight in the great debate of religion. It really just felt like a familiar tune. Depending on how much discussion you've had on the subject or how much content you've consumed about it, you may or may not feel the same way. But there are still plenty of great things about this movie. It's very well written and directed, well performed, and it will give the average viewer a lot to think about. I think that the best point that this movie makes in a subtle way that some viewers might not catch is that people will always see what they choose to see. We all see the world differently, and with that said, I saw this movie and I thought it was decent. There are things that I really enjoyed about it, I just wouldn't really call it a unique or amazing experience for me personally. But that's with the knowledge that plenty of people will enjoy this one. If the topic of religion doesn't immediately deter you, you might actually get a lot out of this. If that subject does deter you, or if you prefer horror movies that are legitimately terrifying, then this one might not be the one you're looking for. Thank you for watching this review. If it brought you any value at all, please give it a like. It really does help the channel grow. I'll see you later this week with my review of A Real Pain.